Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. We made it. It is officially 2024, and I'm putting this episode out on the second day of the new year because I have a really exciting announcement. I'll be rebranding the SaaS Sales Players podcast to just Sales Players. And with that rebrand and relaunch, I'm also bringing on a co host, one that's been on the show a few times before, and someone who I've collaborated with now quite a bit on a bunch of different projects. That's Chase Barmore. And so in today's episode, I'm going to actually cut to our new podcast intro music and then over to a conversation that I shared with Chase around what our goals are for the show. We talk a little bit about his background, why I think he's going to make a fantastic co-host for the Sales Players podcast, and what we plan to do with the show from here on out. It's really exciting. This has been a long time coming. As many of you know, I started this back in 2020, and I've been running it as a solo creator for a long time, 3.5 years. And I felt like I needed a little bit more creativity infused into the day-to-day. Despite having some amazing guests and interviews on, I thought it might help to have another persona join me and help me with the interviews, and then to do some episodes where we just riff on some topics. Cool about Chase, and we get into this here in just a second, is that he comes from a completely different background than me. So he brings a lot of really interesting stuff to the table. He was an entrepreneur for a decade across 2 businesses. One of them he sold. We're going to do a lot of episodes talking about that stuff. So I don't want to steal any thunder here. So here we go. We're going to cut to the new intro music. And from there, you're going to hear a conversation between Chase and I about what's next for the show. Here we go. 3 years ago, in 2020, I set out on this vision of trying to create a podcast that shined a light on sales players, the individual contributors in any SaaS business that are the ones running the plays, selling the deals, working internally, being accountable for a quota, all that stuff. And I honestly can't believe that we're 3.5 years on, and the show's still going. But over the last couple of months, I've felt a little bit, I don't want to use the word bored, but I've felt a little bit stagnant in the content just as a solo creator. Of course, we've had some amazing interviews over the last couple of months, but I wanted to infuse some more dynamic into the show. So enter Chase Barmore. Chase, and I'll set the stage here, man, and then you can kind of more formally introduce yourself and
Let's go.
Yeah.
All right.
So Chase has been a guest on the show twice. And you reached out to me, gosh, I don't even know when it was. It feels like it's been 2 years now, maybe.
2 years. Yeah. Probably almost been 2 years since cold outreached the SaaS sales players because I didn't know what SaaS was and I needed to learn about it.
Yeah.
So I reached out to you.
So since then, we've worked together on some coaching, but also we've now kind of collaborated on a bunch of consulting projects and some creative projects and things like that. And so, I don't know, it was a few months back that you said we should collaborate on the podcast. And that light bulb kind of went off for me where I said, yeah, you know what? I've been doing this now for 3 years as a solo creator. Sure, I've interviewed people and that's been the lifeblood of the show. But how can I create more content without necessarily having to interview a guest? How can we be more frequent on the content that we create? And how can we kind of infuse a different perspective into everything? And so that's why this is the official first episode of The Sales Players, which is the new rebranded name of the show, formerly known as SaaS Sales Players. And we've got Chase Barmore here as the co-host. And so going forward, Chase and I will be co-hosting interviews and then doing a lot of episodes where it's just the two of us riffing on a specific topic, talking about industry stuff, sales tips, tricks, tactics, all still the same vision of focusing on the tactical stuff, like the day-to-day things you need to do to close deals, build pipeline, build a network, build your career, but also focusing on some other topics because Chase brings a totally different set of insights to this podcast because he comes from a totally different background than I do. So we'll still focus a lot on SaaS because we both actually work in SaaS sales, but I think it's cool to have Chase on because he's sold in some other categories. And with that, I'm going to just pass the mic over to you, Chase. Tell us a little bit about your career up to this point. Remind us, I know, again, you've been on the show before, but tell us, what you've been up to for the last decade and what you're doing now, maybe.
Well, Pleasure to be here, Jesse, and thanks for reaching out. And I'm super excited to be a part of the sales players, which RIP the
Yeah.
SaaS sales players. I love the SaaS sales players. I mean, this podcast has changed my life. And what's so strange is how I think it just starts our connection of cold outreaching somebody.
Yeah.
And I think I just looked you up. I was listening to you in my car as I was door dashing because I had just sunset one of my businesses. That will obviously be a few episodes of stories that we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, I had gotten a suggestion from a Shopify rep that I wasn't making the revenue that I needed to with my business. And I was like, what am I got to do? And she's like, Chase, I think you should get into SaaS sales. And I was like, what the hell is that? And she's like, Klaviyo, all these plugins on the back end of Shopify. Each one of these is a business that you could work for. And I really had gotten into tech. I've always loved tech. I come from the hospitality world. I come from the juice realm. I
Yeah.
owned a valet company, and I don't know. It's like I love people. I love talking, and I fell into this SaaS game. I called Jesse up and I said, "What is it going to take for me to get a job?" My first role was the second salesperson at a company called What Converts, and I really enjoyed and I thrived at that company. And I was there for about a year and a half. I was the top performing AE. Um, Helped an SDR become the top performing AE. He's still there. And now I work at Hyros, and we are a marketing attribution AI tracking platform taking over the world.
That's awesome. So yeah, I want to emphasize the fact that we both still have a day job as quota carrying sellers. And I've always thought that that helps hopefully lend some authenticity to the show because we're not, we're not full-time influencers or thought leaders. We're day-to-day sellers doing it every single day, trying to share the things that we're learning, trying to share our own failures. And there's a lot of them. Chase already alluded to some of his. I've had a lot of them. I probably could share more on this show of the things that I've done wrong that I'd like to do better. Right. So,
And
uh,
we're going to get into that. I mean, that's how I want to do this show. It's like I want to be real, I want to be raw. And I think that being a fully remote worker, you have to create these communities. And that's one of the things that Jesse and we actually have a small Slack community, but I've been a part of many different communities. And it's sharing these lessons and growing and riffing off of each other and saying, maybe this deal's not going through. What can I do differently? And even though you don't work at my company, you still bring value. You can say maybe you need to look at it a different way. Maybe you need to approach it this way. Maybe you need to go talk to that person.
yeah, sometimes having a completely different perspective is actually really valuable because I run into this too, where if you're in the same company and you're selling the same thing as your peers and you try to get advice, sometimes it doesn't land because they're also in that same, they're down in those same weeds. So it's really interesting to have a network around you that can help coach you through a deal from a completely different perspective. So I like that. And yeah, we've got a community that we're growing. The sales players on Slack. We'll keep a link in the show notes for how to join that community. It's free right now. But yeah, come join us, be part of the movement here. Let me ask you this, Chase. What are your goals for being a co-host on a podcast? What would you like to achieve and what doors would you like to open? And then what kind of value would you like to provide? I'm just kind of curious what your incentives are, your intentions. It's a big question.
It's a big question. And, one of my favorite podcast hosts, which is so funny, his book is looking me right in the face behind Jesse's head.
Mm-hmm.
It's The Tools of Titans. And Tim Ferris has been a mentor of mine for, I can't even remember when he put out the 4 Hour Work Week. And listening to that podcast, listening to that book, has changed my life. And one thing that I've really learned in being in recently just being in the tech space is I want to connect with people. I want to share what I've learned. I think I've learned a lot. I think I've done a lot of wrong. I've done a lot right. I've
Mhm.
sold a lot of deals. I've sold a lot of deals wrong. I've done the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that documenting this process is going to be really good. And it's also going to help me to not have to say the same thing over and over. And this will be able to live in a living document to document my process of where I want to be the top seller. And I do want to have a 7-figure W-2. I mean, I know that that is that's pretty high, but it is possible. And I want to document my process to that. And yeah, make some friends on the way, make some connections. And I love making referrals and connections to people. And I think that I just like to learn about people's stories. And I want to learn more about you, Jesse. I want to understand, like, why did you start this thing? Like, what did you do? Why this? Why now?
Yeah, no, I think that's similar to my reasoning for starting the show in the onset. Was for me, I looked at this as an opportunity to interview top sellers and learn as much as I could in a way that was really like intimate and really hands-on. I don't learn very well from textbooks. I don't learn that well from trainings. I have to really get in there and get my hands on something in order to learn. So for me, this was a way to actually learn more about sales by interviewing top performers. And then it became kind of a thing where it opens a lot of doors and it builds a network, and that's super awesome and valuable and just very rewarding. And then I come from a family of educators, teachers. So for me, I like teaching things. I don't claim to know everything, but I'm happy to share what I do know, and think I've learned a lot, and I try to document my learnings in a way that they're easy to share later on, because I have a hard time learning through other mediums. Again, it's all like anecdotal stuff that I learn from, and really getting hands on. So just to kind of tease out why I started this show and what I plan to continue doing is creating awesome content that's helpful and valuable that you can listen to on your morning walk or your commute into the office, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for how you can level up your career.
And thinking about that, uh, one thing that I really would like to, and Jesse's sharing, yeah, he's met Tim Ferris. He's a lot cooler than me so far.
Uh,
One thing that I do want to share is I've been in bad places in my life of where I don't have enough money to pay payroll, or I don't have, enough to make the mortgage payment or whatnot. I've been in jackpot situations and I've made it through it. And I want to share different tactics of how to change your mindset. I also want to look at biohacking. I want to look at, not just sales, not just money. I want to look at relationships. How do you deal with things in your life? How do you have a good life? And that's something I want to bring to the show as well. Is not just it's all about getting the money, but it's actually how to have a good life and setting yourself up and creating that own personal brand that can help you to do the things you want to do.
yeah. I have a whole episode on this that I did years ago now, which is that sales is really a lifestyle. This business is a lifestyle. And with that comes things like relationships and stress and, of course, financial stuff as well. But how do you balance yourself out when this can very easily consume your entire day to day? Because it's such a busy industry, it can really, completely suck you in. So yeah, how do you manage health and relationships and wellness? How do you grow as a person? How do you become a better person? I think it's actually really important that we talk about topics like that on the show as well. And I'm looking forward to sharing more about that kind of thing. I've said in the past that I always feel like I didn't spend enough time on the show so far talking about the ups and downs of the industry. I've, tended to be pretty positive and optimistic because I think this is a great profession and it's a great thing to do and a great place to dedicate yourself to making a lot of money and making an impact. But with that comes ups and downs across all kinds of personal fronts. So I'm excited to hear that those are topics you want to cover too.
That and yeah, I think that people just need to hear the truth, and we both have a lot of truth to tell. And this industry, is you can see, especially from like when I first came in, it was like 2022, everything was on the uptrend. We were still on I think the COVID train was really good for SaaS. It was not good for the food industry, which I was in. But this year we've seen mass layoffs. We've seen just cutthroat, just we'll cut, 10% of the staff, no questions asked, even if you're a top rep. So really just figuring out those tactical tips. And I'm not a traditional seller. Like I didn't go to school for selling. Um, and I'll have just very basic questions that I think a lot of people will have, of just like how to use LinkedIn, how to use email, what tools are you using? What's your setup? On screens, what desk are you using? What supplements are you taking? What's giving you an edge? I just want to know how to have an edge, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I love that. Well, since I've got this, I'm sharing my photo here where I'm hearkening back to the Tim Ferris remark earlier. And if you're watching this episode, you'll see here this picture of me with Tim Ferris. I figure I've actually never told this story on the air. But I got to meet Tim Ferris, who's also a huge influence on, my desire to go out and launch a podcast. And someone I think I've read almost every one of his books. I've definitely followed him for years and years at this point. When I first read The 4-Hour Workweek, I just had a complete mindset shift. I don't know there's been any other book in my life that's been that influential, where I completely rethought my life trajectory after I read The 4-Hour Workweek. And I think there's a lot of people that say that. It's an amazing book. Obviously, I'm a huge fan. And so I was working in Austin a few years ago at a WeWork, and that's where this picture was taken. And it was so crazy. I knew he was moving to Austin because he had written a whole blog about it. I think he did a podcast episode about it. So, and I was living in Austin at the time. I remember thinking like, oh, that'd be funny if I ran into him, but like, what are the odds of that? It's a big city, and you're probably not going to run into Tim Ferris at the, corner store. So I'm working at the WeWork, and I walk in after like a lunch break, and I just noticed Tim Ferris sitting there at a bar stool with his dog. You can kind of see the dog in the picture. And I was like, no way, that's Tim Ferriss.
And you are wearing a ClickFunnels shirt too, man. You got the ClickFunnels hacker shirt. I mean, this is like you could market this picture.
Oh, this is like my profile picture for the longest time. I'm like, look, it's I got a lot of street cred from my funnel hacker shirt. They give you those when you sign up for like your first month of ClickFunnels. I'm not a ClickFunnels customer anymore, but it's really expensive. But yeah, it's a cool product. I have a lot of respect for that business, because it's a software business that was grown bootstrapped. They didn't raise any capital. They grew it to whatever its size is now. I don't honestly know what their valuation is, but huge company that they grew without venture capital. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I run into Tim Ferris, and I was like, I'm the kind of person that when I run into it doesn't happen very often, by the way, but when I run into someone that's famous or a public figure, my wife runs the other direction, and she's like, that's crazy. That's so-and-so over there. I'm not going to go near them. She's, just not the personality that's going to go and tap them on the shoulder. And I'm like the complete opposite. I'm like, let's go talk to that person. I've done it with a couple of like musicians that I love. At least one politician I've approached, which is sketchy. And with Tim Ferris, I was like, I'm not going to get another chance to go tap Tim Ferris on the shoulder. And so I just went up to him, and he was super kind about it. I think he's a very private person from what I gathered. He was a lot more introverted and quiet than I thought he was going to be, which, I guess is to be expected. He's an author, right? He's not like Tony Robbins. He's a self-help author, but he's a lot more chill. But he was super
stoic. Would you say he was stoic?
Stoic. That's his thing. That's right. He did the whole TED talk on stoicism.
He did? I'm gonna have to watch that. I didn't know that he did.
Yeah, very stoic.
Okay.
And I get the other one. And Yeah, he was super generous with his time. I think we talked for like 35 minutes. I asked him a bunch of questions about the 4-hour work week, about his investments. He was like an open book about the companies he'd invested in. And yeah, he told me something about how Shopify was where he's made most of his money. Like he was a very early investor in Shopify and just made a significant amount of money from that IPO, which not surprising. um,
Yeah.
he was an early investor in a lot of the high growth companies out of the Bay Area. Then we talked like the 4-hour body. I asked him a bunch of questions about the 4-hour body, and he was very generous with his time and just super charming and a great conversation. So I'll never forget that. And he was kind enough to let us take a picture together, and that's where this picture comes from. So yeah, so if you're watching, you can see this. I'll post this in the show notes or something. But awesome podcast.
Favorite Tim Ferriss interview? Go.
Ooh, that's a good question. I really like. He interviewed. Shoot, man, that's really hard. That's a good question.
I got one that I love.
Which one's that?
It's this Jamie Foxx one.
I was gonna say Jamie Foxx. I was gonna say
I,
Jerry Seinfeld too.
oh yeah, the Jerry Seinfeld one was really good, but the Jamie Foxx, and this could be a little controversial, you know, but I love and this is one thing that I just love about Tim Ferriss is how he is able to distill down creativity. And Jamie Foxx tells a story of Kanye West coming to his house at a party. Jamie Foxx used to have all these parties. And he said just one night, Kanye West just comes to his house and he's at the party. They're having a huge party. He's like, hey, man, I need to use your studio. Can I just use your studio? And he's like, sure. And he's like, you want to come down there and record something? And he's like, yeah, sure. And that they recorded that one song that night of I don't know the name of the song, but it's a popular song and it has Jamie Foxx's voice on it.
Oh,
And
really?
it's like they just recorded it that night. It was a party. His crew just shows up and then they record it. And then if you watch the Kanye West documentary on Netflix, you get to actually see this in real time happen. It's crazy.
Way. Okay. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, the Jamie Foxx one is definitely exceptional. Man, I like a lot of the business people he's had on, like Cal Newport, business author. All the ones he does with Kevin Rose are really interesting to me.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
NFTs, you know.
yeah,
I don't know how much crypto we're going to be talking about on this podcast.
not
A lot of
much.
crying for me. A lot of crying for me on that crypto. So we're not going that direction here.
No, this is a podcast more about investing in yourself, but yeah, from time to time we can talk about businesses that might be good stocks to own, or startups that might be a good place to park your career. Latch on to their growth and join as part of your career, or I don't know. The world's it's getting easier to invest in early startups, which is pretty cool, and that's I think something that a lot of listeners should consider that they may not realize they have an opportunity to do is go out and be part of an early startup, whether you're there as a full-time employee or you can be a small-time investor in some of these through some networks like WeFunder. Most people haven't ever heard of WeFunder, but it allows you to go and do like micro investments in startups and stuff. So anyway, yeah, lots of topics to cover on the show, man. And one of the things I've found about being myself an avid listener to business books like Tim Ferriss's books and, whoever, Cal Newport, but also listening to a lot of business podcasts is I tend to ultimately become a better salesperson because I'm more like fluent in business as a whole. And I've said this before on the show that good business people make great salespeople. So
Yep.
that's the goal behind this is not just sales, but of course all topics business that can then relate to being better at sales. All right, man. Well, I think that's the pod for now. Tune in for the next episode. We've got some interviews on the schedule, and again, Chase and I will be spinning up a mic every couple days like this, hopefully in the next year, to just talk about what's working, what's not working, lessons learned, stories, all that good stuff. So make sure to subscribe, and thanks all for tuning in.
And you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Chase Barmore. Happy to connect there anytime. Also join our Slack channel and join the community.